autocrat would damage his standing among British socialists and place his own throne at risk. Even had such an offer been extended, Nicholas and Alexandra would have been reluctant to abandon Russia out of a sense of duty, despite their calamities. In August 1917, the provisional government sent Nicholas and his family to the city of Tobolsk in Siberia, where they lived in the former governor's residence. The provincial city remained well disposed towards the fallen Tsar, and Nicholas and the children socialized in secret with the more sympathetic guards. The fate of the Romanovs was destined to get worse after November 1917, when the Bolsheviks, under Lenin, overthrew the provisional government. Since Imperial Russia used the Julian calendar, which was 12 days behind the Gregorian calendar used by most of the world, the event is known to history as the October Revolution. The provisional government had been unable to assert its political power and was in the hands of the Petrograd Soviet, while the failure of a summer offensive in July strengthened support for the radical Bolsheviks, who demanded an end to the war. In January 1918, the Bolsheviks consolidated their hold on power by closing down the Constituent Assembly, where they were outnumbered by the socialist revolutionaries. Keen to secure his power in Russia, in March, Lenin reluctantly approved the signing of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany and its allies, surrendering control of Poland, the Baltic states, Belarus, and Ukraine. The Bolshevik suppression of the Constituent Assembly and their capitulation to Germany created the conditions for civil war. In the spring of 1918, the Czech Legion, who were making their way east along the Trans-Siberian Railway in order to join the Allies on the Western Front, staged an uprising against Bolshevik rule. The Bolshevik leadership had not decided what to do with the former Tsar, but Lenin's second-in-command, Leon Trotsky, hoped to bring Nicholas to Moscow for a show trial before executing him. In April 1918, the Bolshevik revolutionary Vasily Yakovlev acted on instructions from the central government to bring Nicholas and Alexandra to Moscow, but on the way they were intercepted by a detachment of Bolsheviks from the Ural Soviet, who took control of the convoy and took them to their base in Ekaterinburg. Nicholas, Alexandra, and Grand Duchess Maria arrived on the 30th of April and were imprisoned in the house of Nikolai Ipatiev, a military engineer. The Tsarevich had been ill and had initially been left behind with 3 of his sisters, but by the 23rd of May, the rest of the family arrived along with their doctor, Evgeny Botkin, and 3 servants. As the Czech Legion advanced on Ekaterinburg, at the beginning of July, the central leadership in Moscow decided that the Romanovs should be executed in Ekaterinburg. On the 4th of July, the deputy head of the Ekaterinburg secret police, Yakov Yurovsky, was appointed commandant of the Ipatiev house. In the early hours of the 17th of July, the family and their attendants were brought into the basement. After the 12 men of the firing squad entered the room, Yurovsky announced that the Ural Soviet had decided to execute the whole family. A stunned Nicholas asked, "What?" before Yurovsky repeated his orders, and the firing began. 3 men in the firing squad claimed that they had fired the fatal shot that accounted for the former Tsar, but regardless of who was responsible, Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia, was dead at the age of 50, along with his wife, his 5 children, and 4 loyal attendants. Yurovsky ordered his men to hide the bodies at a location where they could not be found by the counter-revolutionary White armies, who were days away from Ekaterinburg. The Soviet government claimed in public that only Nicholas had been executed, and even when it became increasingly clear that the whole family had been eliminated, there were rumors that Tsarevich Alexei, or one of his sisters, may have survived and escaped. The memory of the dead Tsar served as a rallying point for the monarchists and counter-revolutionaries who opposed the Bolsheviks, but by 1921, Lenin's forces had won the Civil War, and his Soviet regime would remain in power until 1991. From their exile in London, Paris, New York, white émigrés continued to hope for a collapse of Soviet communism and the return of the Russian monarchy. In 1981, the Russian Orthodox Church abroad canonized Nicholas II and his family, and in 2000, the Russian Orthodox Church in Russia also agreed to confer sainthood on them. In the meantime, the remains of Nicholas, Alexandra, and 3 of their daughters were discovered in a ditch near the Apachev house in the late 1970s, and after DNA identification in 1998, they were buried in a special chapel in the St. Peter and Paul Cathedral in St. Petersburg. In 2007, further remains were discovered at a nearby site and later identified as those of Tsarevich Alexei and either Grand Duchess Maria or Anastasia. In 2015, the Russian Orthodox Church ordered the exhumation of 5 sets of remains in the chapel for further testing, while renewed investigations confirmed the identification of the remains in 2020. As of 2024, they have not yet been reburied in the chapel. The legacy of Tsar Nicholas II of Russia continues to be debated among historians of Russia, and it is closely related to the question of whether it was possible to avoid the horrors of communist rule in Russia in the 20th century. Nicholas had been exposed to revolutionary violence in his early teens with the assassination of his grandfather, Tsar Alexander II, and the political instability would only increase during his own reign. After the unexpected death of his father Alexander III in 1894, Nicholas came to the throne unprepared for government. Despite being a well-educated and intelligent man, Nicholas was indecisive and unsocial, and initially found it difficult to stand up to his ministers. As Tsar, Nicholas was able to make his mark in foreign policy, but defeat in the Russo-Japanese War dented his prestige and fueled domestic opposition to his rule. When peasant uprisings and strikes broke out in response to heavy taxation and poor working conditions, Nicholas wavered between granting concessions and suppressing unrest by force. Although personally a kind and gentle man, his unwillingness to surrender the powers which he considered to be given to him by God, and his belief that the Russian political system was unsuited to representative democracy, meant that he only agreed to establish an elected legislative assembly in October 1905 in order to keep his throne. After doing so, he could only work with the Duma when the electoral laws were amended to exclude the majority of the population. Despite all the difficulties he faced, Nicholas ultimately relied on the army to crack down on disturbances, and it was only the First World War which created the conditions for Nicholas to give up his throne in March 1917. Though a prisoner after his abdication, Nicholas felt a sense of liberation after being relieved of the burdens of government. But any hopes of a comfortable retirement were extinguished by the Bolshevik Revolution, leading to a brutal end at the Apachev house. What do you think of Tsar Nicholas II of Russia? Was he a weak and incompetent ruler and a brutal autocrat who was responsible for cracking down on political opposition and encouraging anti-Semitic pogroms? Or did he not go far enough in using force to maintain political stability in the empire? Please let us know in the comments section. And in the meantime, thank you very much for watching.